Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and if you're like me, you're excited to see more information about the new Warmind DLC coming up on May 8th. Mark your calendars for the 24th of April, by the way, since we have the Twitch reveal being held on that date, similar to the one for Curse of Osiris and, well, every other DLC release, I guess. Originally, I had put out a video about the new information we had about the news update by the Bungie dev team the other day, but I sat back and looked over this video and decided to go a completely different direction, past just analyzing the new image that's been brought to our attention. There are a lot of little bits to pull from it, but what many might be missing is that it really does help to know more about Warminds, and Destiny 2 just doesn't have a lot of very good information about them so far. So, it's definitely more interesting if you know what's actually going on with Warminds. Before we get started, I need to give a big shout out to Isacole over on Twitter for informing me of a voice line that we'll be referencing by Failsafe a bit into our research today. You can find her on Twitter in the description below as the first link. She does some fan-made projects for Destiny and other fandoms, so go follow her if you're interested. And apparently she also now works for Destiny Trackers, so that's another reason if you're already a fan of them. Yeesh, I hate having long intros. Let's get into this. Destiny 2 doesn't exactly tell the Warmind story very well, and their involvement to this point has been minimal at best. Io is the first name we hear of these Warminds, and as a new player, or default dialogue on PC, you hear the following from Ikora explaining what a Warmind is.
So, what's a Warmind, exactly?
It's a kind of artificial intelligence, designed to defend humanity against the unknown.
Not really a good representation or even close to full explanation. I mean, it covers the basics well enough, I suppose. They are an AI, and they do work to understand the unknown, but there's so much more to them than that. Let's start with where they come from. Back in the very beginning of our lore hunt, and I do mean the very beginning, we're introduced to a guy called Jacob Hardy. Hardy was one of the first human beings to come in contact with the Traveler. This is the opening of Destiny 1, and it shows an atmosphere forming on Mars thanks to the Traveler, rain falling and all. Through research and time, Jacob Hardy is able to convey what he learns about the Traveler back to all of humanity. It wasn't, of course, just him, but he's the one that's highlighted for us in the cards within the Golden Age. A couple of the only cards that really kind of cover it, now that I think about it. Obviously there's others, but Hardy is probably the most understandable one to look back on when trying to understand the conceptions of light. But here's an excerpt to kind of tell you what I mean. I knew I'd never fly another mission like that. I recognized the need for a new love. That's why I threw my cognitive skills into understanding the Traveler. How can one entity so quickly and utterly remake an entire world? 50 years later, I'm conversant in high mathematics, particularly topological thoughts and the slippery irreality of light. I'm involved in a project to study the Traveler's terraforming actions right now. Hardy's focus of research aside, because that sparked some other ideas I didn't have before, this is just to outline that the Traveler opened up a lot of different elements for us researching light, and how we can actually infuse this into our own technology. This is even backed up by Failsafe on Nessus with a somewhat rarer voice line.
Posit. Artificial life exists because of the Traveler's influence. Extrapolation. The Traveler is my father. Further thought required.
Failsafe is one of the best examples of an AI being infused with light. Before the Golden Age, we had learning machines that tried their best at the programming that we were able to give them, and of course this relates back to what we actually have today. You know, like Google or Apple or Amazon. We have these voice assistants that are constantly learning what we have today from Amazon Echo and Google Home, but these are not quite as advanced as something like Failsafe. Failsafe, meanwhile, is not quite as advanced as a Warmind. While we're on the subject of the Golden Age, since that's where Warminds come from anyway, we go back to a story that's oftentimes referenced for one reason or another, which is the Ishtar Academy crew of Chioma Essie, Maya Sundaresh, Dwayne McNaiad, and the lovable Dr. Shim. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read over all of these Grimoire cards, but the 4 original Vex cards showcase an instance where a Vex simulates and takes over this Ishtar Academy facility without the 4 members mentioned really knowing about it. That is, until after 227 copies were made of each member. What stopped this Vex was a Warmind, and this is quite possibly the first event that we know of involving one, or at least an event that showcases the processing power of one of them. Through its computational skills, the Warmind was able to break through the Vex hold on the 4 members of the team, making it possible for them to return to their normal routine. I mean, so far as we know, for all we know, it never actually ended for any of them, and they just wanted us to believe that, right? The Vex could still be holding on to that simulation, and that's why things went the way they did. Right? Joking aside, we aren't sure where exactly this Warmind is, if it's on Venus, the spot that the Academy is centered around, or if it's off-site. This doesn't confirm the existence of a Venus Warmind, but it does indicate that there was one in communication with the complex on Venus. We are aware through events of Destiny 1 that there were several networking stations for Rasputin to communicate outwardly from Earth. And there was a network of Warminds originally. Rasputin is just called the first among equals. We aren't sure of the number of Warminds in total, however. Just don't want to confuse the issue any more than it already is. That being said, Rasputin, the largest or at least more known Warmind that we know of on Earth, is the only confirmed Warmind that we actually know of. In the Taken King, we know of a few other possibilities that could exist, like the somewhat talked about Charlemagne, whom has been mentioned since Alpha of Destiny, and is possibly shorthanded in some items that have been pulled from the database, but there is still one that showcases another possible Warmind, called Martel. Without digging too far into the history of these names, it's just an interesting connection that Charles Martel is the grandfather of Charlemagne. This is a bit flip-flopped with what we have in Destiny, should Charlemagne as the Warmind still be a canonical piece. If not, then it could indicate that Rasputin is a father to this Martel Warmind core, or something. Your guess is as good as mine with the information we have at this point. From here, we have very little information of Warmind involvement during or before the collapse. We know a bit of a lead-up with cards like Old Russia 3 outlining General Lanshu's knowledge of events that Rasputin is taking on Earth, the much-argued Rasputin 5, which possibly shows Rasputin had a hand in keeping the travel on Earth, and Siva, which we see several ties between the Warminds and the Red Nanomachine, along with a few other cards that mention loading Siva onto colony ships to be used as a means to help build a colony once it lands. They handled the usual day-by-day operation, and in Vex 5 showcase an involvement in making an anti-suicide drug with the dawn of the device, the first time we hear of Future War Cult's time dilation device. After the collapse, however, we know that Rasputin isn't a very big fan of Guardians. The first Siva encounter is proof of this, with the Iron Lords being met with a not-so-inviting stance from constructs and frames, ones that Lord Saladin says he hasn't seen since that encounter. Rasputin also hasn't been the best of hosts while we move around in the Cosmodrome or otherwise, sometimes taking action to obliterate some Guardians that wander into his holds, leaving only scraps of armor and their weapons left over. These are events that make it difficult to trust him in the Dark Age and beyond, even as far as our own Guardians' actions in the City Age. From these events, however, we don't know a lot of Rasputin, what he might be hiding from us, or what other connections he has to our solar system. It's a really tough bit to crack for anyone interested in his overall design after so long at the Cosmodrome on his own. These are reasons why we're interested in Rasputin, and of course other Warminds besides. With his overall knowledge of what's happening in our solar system at nearly any given time, especially with warsats and other information stations around our system, this would make him a valuable ally should we be able to turn him and at least give us a hand. And of course, the question turns up as to why he isn't helping us right now. These are things I am sure most of us hope to understand soon enough in the upcoming DLC, or at least stand as possibility for what might be to come. Along with this, he's one of the only ones that has full, complete records of the Golden Age, and that might help to answer a lot of other questions for us. Anyway, as far as summing up what a Warmind is and who the major players are and might be, I think it's time to take a look at the new image that Bungie's dropped on us this past week. First off, I'm really glad I waited until we got the 4K image because it has a lot more hidden in the details. It's just a lot easier to make it all out. After our conversation we just had about the Warminds, I hope you realize this may or may not be Rasputin. There's a few pieces of evidence that really pop out to suggest as much, but before I get too far ahead of myself, just remember that Warmind doesn't mean Rasputin necessarily. I'm still highly suspicious, but I have a feeling it's probably going to end up being Rasputin anyway. Moving on. My immediate reaction is to always move into the background of an image so I can take a look at the sky and the surroundings before I really look at the foreground, with the objects I'm really being presented with and forced to look at. In the background, there are actually two images, one being the sky of the planet that we're on, and one could be a wall or hallway within the structure we see in the foreground. It at least holds a lot of similar diamond patterns along with it. Along with wires. Lots and lots of wires. Diamonds are a pretty common shape that we see around Destiny. We see it in the loading screens, we see it in the Rasputin and other Warmind logos, we see it on our weapons. It's just everywhere. It's a common symbol. To see it here so many times, I feel like I'm taking some geometrist warp idea of an eye exam, but that's besides the point. The red layer of this image, for lack of better terminology, seems to resemble a nervous system. Almost. It seems like brain synapses firing off, and being what we know of Warminds as their heavy calculators, this would make a bit of sense. There's also a gaggle of wires and even computer consoles seen in this layer, leading to the center of this diamond. Obviously, the first thing I think of it's red in Destiny is Siva, which, since Siva and Rasputin seemed to have a thing back in the day, there might be some truth in that. It also could just be red because red. We don't really know artist intent at this point, so guesswork is all we have. Do I think it's Siva? Not really. The comparison of the Siva cables and these are also a bit off. Do I think this is some kind of brain pattern? Very possible. We know that the Golden Age dealt with a lot of brain function and understanding the mind a bit further, showcased with exos. I don't have to say much else. When you're able to implant a human consciousness into a frame of some kind, that's proof enough that brains were probably a pretty high function for us in the Golden Age. There are these familiar circles similar to the loading screen we see all over, and I'm still not entirely sure what to make of them. Just calling up a common theme. As always, if you think of something, let me know below. Let's move on here and talk about some of the sky elements. The sky has several things of import to call out, and it starts to give a few more hints of where this area may be housing this Warmind building. There's a few draft clouds, which many could associate to Earth right off the bat, especially with its north or south poles. You're not wrong to think that, but remember that even Mars and Venus have an atmosphere at this point, ones that are undefined in their density, but they do exist. Some of these clouds seem lighter and a bit more windswept, but the most interesting piece is the lights seen in the right side of the sky. These look somewhat similar to the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights as we call them here on Earth. This could indicate a somewhat northern position on the planet we're on. Further, however, just underneath these lights is a smaller object that's caught in seeming orbit with its larger body. There's also another one a bit further down, hidden in the lower clouds, but this one seems a little bit further away. The original teaser image we had didn't have this brighter object in the sky, but this one really gives me the impression that this planet housing this Warmind platform is not Earth. Destiny's Earth does have a couple other objects that hover around it, but they're mostly space junk, things like the International Space Station and other warsats. To my knowledge, I haven't seen any orbiting object that looks quite like this. That's why I'm going to say this is Mars. To those that have completed the Arecibo adventure on Io, that shouldn't come as a surprise to you, however.
That music, it hurts. Just give me a second. It says, never ask for anything, never for anything, and especially from those who are stronger than you. They'll make the offer themselves and give everything themselves. I don't understand. Something's happening. Hey, sorry, I spaced out for a second there. What were we doing?
This has been foreshadowed enough, and it would be, for me, proof enough, if it wasn't for what else I see in this image. A bit further down from the same point we were at, you'll notice the soil color. It looks red. Within most geology on Earth, at least per my knowledge, tundra land and other soil is generally darker in color. This doesn't really fit with what we know of Earth, so this is just another feather in the Mars cap. As we move on, we see another obvious tie-in to the Arecibo mission, however, and that's the surface this platform is sitting on, being mostly cold and ice. You can really make it out on the left side with a lot of this surface cracked apart. For most computing, this makes sense. You need a large amount of cold to counteract the amount of heat that is generated by general computing. I mean, if you have a computer, you know exactly what I mean by this. Assuming that Warminds operate in the same manner, they would need colder areas to operate. That point can be largely argued with advances in our technology, but I stress again, a Warmind was used to counteract the Vex, and per what we know, their calculation powers are immense as it is. I should also mention, it's snowing, but that's a slight afterthought to this point. Getting back to the very bright object that we see, I'm kind of inclined to think that this is Deimos. Underneath it, I would probably figure that this might be Phobos, just a little bit further away. Just wanted to add that in before I forgot about it. Alright, how about the structure itself? Well, past the design of it, we see that it may or may not be that large. Or at least the entryway seems rather tiny. Here we see the possible landing platform that we may access this facility from. There's a landing light and a door that seem open per the moment. There does seem to be a second platform above this one, so it could be an upper and lower entrance. We're not entirely sure of scale here, but this facility very well could be deeper than what it is that we see. If this is our new patrol area, it could be bigger than what we have with Mercury. What worries me from a gameplay standpoint is no sparrows. We'll have to see when this gets to launch, however. The only other major piece that I see here are these pylons or weapons that are surrounding this structure. I have a few theories on these, but they tie into an even greater one, and I don't want to spill the beans just yet. That being said, if they are weapons of some kind, them pointing in doesn't make a ton of sense. Ah well, we'll have to see. Also obvious, you must construct additional pylons jokes here. The reason I'm thinking these are weapons systems is because of the different angles we see them at. The ones at the front showcase some kind of loading system near the bottom of them, while those in the side seem to have an opening at the top. They could be, at their basest, some kind of cannon, one that hopefully holds the true story of Destiny 2. Okay, I had to make the joke. But seriously, Rasputin is in charge of multiple weapon systems, one large one we know of being sadometric in design. At its roots, sado, in Latin, supposedly means to slaughter or cut down into pieces. Metric is a standardized unit of measure unless you live in the US. Basically, these weapons are meant to be powerful and cut down anything that they come in contact with. Presumably, these are also weapons that were constructed from the Traveler's Light, or at least knowledge thereof. Anyway, I think that covers these pylons pretty in and out. Overall, I'm very excited to see what happens. April 24th is the livestream event if you're interested in seeing what's to come with DLC 2, and the update goes live on May 8th. More story, more game modes, more, well, everything that will hopefully add something more for us in this universe we all mostly love. Nothing wrong with that if you ask me. I think that's where I'll leave things. If you enjoyed this look into Warminds and the reveal image as a whole, you know the buttons to press. If you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the bell since YouTube's doing the normal YouTube thing. Don't forget to do this for all of the creators you care for as well, to actually be notified of new content when it's uploaded. Man, this felt good to dig back in actual lore, huh? Now I'm jazzed to get into the next topic ASAP. I have another Guardian School on the way for you guys too, but until next Spacetime Guardians, take care.